Change is easy, transitions are hard. In today's world, there's so much change going on right now in our world. I think it's very important for us to understand this as leaders, as business owners, and just individuals. What do we need to do to walk through changing really transitions? You give attention to some of these things, you will be way ahead of the game. Your team will be better for it. Your clients will be better for it. Your culture will be stronger for it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Guidelight podcast. I'm Jason Trent, your host today, and I want to talk about transitions today. So there's a gentleman named William Bridges. He wrote a book called Managing Transitions. I believe, I apologize, I forget the actual name of the book, but it was something about managing transitions, corporate transitions. He had a quote that said, "Change is easy, transitions are hard." And I want to lean into that. And he came up with these three great principles that we all need to kind of understand and walk through when we face transitions in our own life, and especially with corporate transitions or business transitions. This means a lot to me right now because my company right now is going through a transition. And I've spoken to our leadership team. I've spoken to our team at large on this, and I think it's very important for people out there to kind of understand certain steps that we need to walk through when we face transitions in life. And like I said, and we need to look at it more than just it's change. No, there's just certain things. William Bridges does a great job, so I'm going to be quoting a lot of his work on this. Before I do that, when I started thinking about this segment, I went back to my father-in-law, Dennis Britton. Y'all hear me quote him a lot on this channel. And I remember when he was being inducted to his corporate hall of fame for his business, and he made a speech. And one of the things he said, and it's not verbatim, but this is kind of what he said, and it's always stuck with me, and I've kind of used it as a principle to guide me. But it says, change is inevitable. It paralyzes some, it unsettles most, but a faithful few recognize it as the very ground where opportunity is forged, and they move forward while others hesitate. And so in today's world, I mean, you got AI and just the world and crypto. There's so much change going on right now in our world. I think it's very important for us to understand this as leaders, as business owners, and just individuals. What do we need to do to walk through changing really transitions? So I tell you what really sparked this topic was, y'all hear me reference C12, which is a great organization that I was a part of for many, many years. And I still look into the material, so reference them a ton in everything that I do. And Patrick Lencioni and Mike Shiro did a little podcast that really highlighted this William Bridges work. And Patrick Lencioni did a great job of kind of breaking it down. He brought in some other context to it. And so I'm kind of, just kind of going to, you'll hear me saying a lot of stuff, but I want to give a shout out to them because they really kind of help shape the material that we're about to kind of go over. So anyway, so Bridges outlines these three phases of transition. So there's an ending, there's a neutral zone, and there's a new beginning. And everybody's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But I really want to go deep on this. And it's important to take time on this because there's a lot of psychological components. There's a lot of emotional components. There's a lot of strategic components that if not walked through correctly and given the weight that it's due, it can, I've been through a lot of transitions. Y'all know that, Guidelight Legacy Advisors, we talk about, mergers and acquisitions. We talk about companies coming together. I've walked through that my whole career, and I've seen the majority of our transitions have gone really, really well, but there's some that haven't. And it depends on some of these aspects. And I wish I'd read this material years and years ago because it probably would have helped me, smooth over some of the transitions we walked through. But I really I'm going to kind of summarize here. So the ending is, it's a transition begins by acknowledging what must end and honoring what was, and releasing the identities, the systems, or expectations that no longer serve the future. So, ending, sometimes we talk about it being a loss. And in some ways, yes, but we don't want to look at that as like a bad thing, right? I mean, we want to really just kind of frame out endings, that endings aren't necessarily a bad thing. So, but we have to acknowledge it, right? And we have to name it. We have to talk about it. We have to speak it out. We've got to give acknowledgement to what is ending. just kind of speaking those things out. And so, like a lot of times, we walk through in our team is we listed, hey, what are some things that are ending, and you just put it out there, and you just make a list, and you just walk through it, and sometimes people even say, well, you kind of almost grieve it. Well, sometimes, yeah, but it's like it's just change. It's something that's inevitable. So it's important for us to walk through that emotionally, and you'll see why as we kind of get through some of this. But so naming out those things and just talking about, hey, what is ending? And so again, like so, if you're going into a merger, like our company is doing right now, so what's ending? Well, if you're a smaller company and you're going into a bigger company, well, I mean that intimacy or that uniqueness, that's probably going to end a little bit. Now, it doesn't mean your identity and your culture is necessarily going to change and all that. It's just like we've got to acknowledge that there's some things that are ending. Bridges was quoted for saying, "Transitions, begin with an ending, and endings feel like a loss." So naming that loss puts it out there for us to process. Um, so anyways, that's enough with that. Y'all kind of get what I mean about the endings. So I do want to talk about, so what do you do with, once you name these things, once you see the endings? Patrick Lencioni brought in this gentleman's name, David Noor. He did a lot of research and wrote some things about how we respond to endings. And so I want to dig into some of his work, but he basically said there's four ways to we can encounter or address these endings. And so there's four responses, I'll say. And so one is, if we're going through a transition, we can try to restore what was. So these first three I'm going to talk about, they're not necessarily the best choices. So Patrick Lencioni he talked about what, depending on the circumstances, how there could be some good in some of this, but that's not really the best. So I'm just going to paint these first three in kind of a negative light, but there are other aspects and other lenses to look through on some of these, but just kind of bear with me on this. So one is to restore. And so the instinct, anytime there's change, is to kind of anchor into what you've done, what you've known, and you're trying to restore what you've had, the way you used to do things, and even going back to if your leadership changes, going back to different leadership and things like that. So when you restore, that's rooted in grief, not necessarily rebellion. And so that's important for leaders to know that. Sometimes as leaders, we see people, they keep trying to restore, they keep trying to do what they've done in the past. And as a leader, we may look at that, man, they're just being rebellious. They're just not wanting to accept these changes. And we've got to recognize as leaders that those people are just grieving. They need to understand, and it's our job to help walk people through these endings and not look at everything as rebellion. So when we see that, it's important for us to know that when people are trying to restore things, they're just trying to regain emotional stability by creating what felt safe to them, and it's very important to lead them through that. So that's restore. The second response is to replace. This is attempts to substitute something new immediately after something was lost. So sometimes this is just like these knee-jerk reactions, like, okay, this was gone, so I'm just going to gravitate to this. And there's not a lot of wisdom and discernment that goes through those decisions, when you're just trying to replace it with something, because it's something that maybe the leadership's not necessarily leading you through. Maybe it's something that you just gravitate to because it's the first thing you can grab. And when you're trying to replace what was with something that, is not meant to be, but it's just, you're finding comfort in it. It's not really the direction your leadership is rowing. That can end in discomfort and friction and all these bad things. So that's not necessarily a good response either. A third response is to redesign. Noor talks about this redesigning, and he says this is an attempt to hold on to the old structure but reconfigure it. So this is about manipulation. I've seen this happen tons of times, and it's just like, well, they try to accept this new vision, but they'll twist it and tweak it to where they're really just trying to redesign the old in the new format. So I hope you're tracking on some of this, because it is kind of funny. They can hold on to legacy KPIs and things like that don't really apply anymore. And I've seen that time and time again in a lot of the transitions we've walked through. People just keep bringing it up. And again, it's so important as leaders that when you see your team, even people on your leadership team, trying to make these responses where it's to restore or to replace or to redesign, that they're just trying to manage their own emotional responses to this new beginning that we're trying to put out there for them. So again, we're talking about endings, and so these are the responses that Noah talks about. And so the last one is the one we really want to anchor in. As leaders, we want to help our team make this response, and that the correct response when we're working with transition, especially corporate transitions, is to relinquish. And so we want to really relinquish, and this is pretty courageous, because when you relinquish, you're having to trust what everything, there's an unknown out there. So you're having to let go of what was and just relinquish it and just say, you know what, I'm going to trust whatever this new beginning, whatever this new thing is going to be. So as leaders, it's very, very important for us to really communicate well about what this new vision is and what it's going to look like, and help people anchor into their purpose. The Guidelight pathways we talk about a lot on this channel is, the first two are purpose and identity. So when we're talking about um, these transitions, it's real important for us to anchor back into our purpose, the why of why we're doing these things, our identity of who we are. It's not tied up in, hey, I've always done this, like my role. Like a lot of people will anchor in their identity into their role of their work. And as those roles change, it creates that loss. And your identity is not so much tied to your role. It really should tie back to the vision and the mission of the business. And so it's our job to help them see why this is better. We got to tie them to that vision of why it's better. And that helps people relinquish, right? Because if you're relinquishing, you're out there, and if you don't show them that life raft, if you don't show them that that safety net of why this is going to be good, and hey, we're not going to let this crash, that's pretty hard for people to kind of accept. So yeah, I wrote down this quote. It says, people don't get stuck because their future is unclear. They get stuck because the past still has a claim on their identity. So it's our job to help them uncouple from that. So my hope is that that everyone is out there, and that we learn how to relinquish things as we're going through this. Now, this next phase is about the neutral zone. Before I go there, I was thinking about, we talk about endings, and as a faith-based organization, we talk about endings, and really what God kind of put on my heart was the ending of Jesus' ministry. And you think about that, and I just thought, well, the ending of Jesus' ministry, a lot of people say, well, it was on the cross, but I look at it as the Last Supper. So if you look at the Last Supper, Jesus had a ceremony to mark the ending of the old. And I could go on, I could create a whole episode on just the Last Supper and how that really ties into everything that Bridges is talking about and Noor is talking about, and just how, Jesus, relinquished the old covenant, and he was transitioning to the new. And thank goodness. I mean, aren't we all super thrilled that Jesus came and ushered in the new covenant? And so it's important for us to know. And if you look at the old, at the Last Supper, it's marked with so much meaning in that. And it's important as leaders, as we make these transitions, that we create some sort of ceremony for people to understand and to go through. I always think of the Eucharist, taking communion, his body and his blood, and remembering that this transition, it does cost something, and it's not always easy. But hey, what's on the other side is going to be so, so good. So I just, again, I could talk for about an hour on that, but I hope you kind of get what I'm saying on this, is that Jesus followed this pattern of marking and celebrating the ending. And I say celebrating because that Last Supper was a celebration, even though it was hard, even though it was difficult. He relinquished the old to usher in the new. And doing that with the ceremony, the communion, I think was very impactful. So that's all I want to say about the endings. Again, we could go on for hours, and I do want to encourage you to reach out and check out some of Noor's work, David Noor, it's Noer, and as well as William Bridges. But I want to move into the neutral zone. So again, Bridges talks about the endings, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. So the neutral zone, when an ending takes place, it says the next new beginning doesn't happen with the flip of the switch. So we all know, if you've been in any kind of transitions take time. Transitions don't happen overnight. We can put in structures, we can put in all these other things. But the reality is that neutral zone takes time when you're doing transitions. And my team has heard me say this a lot. And I often tell them, I was like, hey guys, we are building this plane as we fly it. Because the great thing about neutral zones, I'll say, is that disorientation is normal. And when a lot of people see things not clearly marked, they see the disorientation, they think it's a failure. Like, hey, there's not a clear path. Hey, I don't know what this is. I just want to know. I just want to know. But the beauty of understanding that the neutral zone, there is going to be disorientation. What it really does with great leaders and great teams is it level sets our mind to see what might be. Our company, High Street Insurance, has a great tagline. I love it. It just says, see possible. As High Street's growing, one of the fastest insurance companies out there in the country, insurance, national insurance agencies, um, you know, everything they do in their leadership, they talk about see possible, and growing so fast and looking at all these things that are coming ahead. Um, we keep looking at what's possible because they're wanting to do something new. They don't want to recreate. Their response is not to recreate or redesign what has been with other insurance agencies. They want to see possible. And that's why we, hitched our wagon to them, because we really love this whole idea of seeing possible. So the neutral zone understand that there is going to be disorientation. As leaders, we've got to understand, hey, we got to walk people through that, right? And I always tell my team, like, guys, I would love to promise you something or give you guarantees, but the idea is you just got to trust us. You got to anchor back into our purpose. You got to anchor into your identity. And then oftentimes in the neutral zone, one of the third Guidelight pathways, we talk about the inner battle. When there's uncertainty, the enemy, he will get in your kitchen and whisper all these lies about this. I've seen it time and time again. And it's the nature of a fallen man. When we don't know what's absolutely clear with our future, the enemy wants to put doubt and sow all this deception and distractions. So it's so important that we really anchor in and stand strong in that inner battle that we have in the neutral zone, right? It matters. Bridges kind of gave some insights. Says when familiar structures dissolve, the mind searches for stability, often before it's ready to find it. And so, all these questionings that we talk about in the psychological aspect of this neutral zone, it's real important as leaders that we just, help keep coming around people, understand, hey, it's going to be okay. Yes. And when we encourage them to, hey, give input, communication is so important in this. We also understand, that productivity, one of the things Bridges talks about is in this neutral zone, productivity often drops. When we're working on transitioning to a new management system in the second quarter this year, and we've went through, and High Street's been great and their leadership team, and they say, listen, production's going to drop because we got so much else going on, and so just understand that, hey, productivity is going to drop, and we got to understand that. But if you have great pathways to have communication and things like that in that neutral zone as things are changing, creativity often can rise, because if you have great people on your team and you encourage them to give us ideas, give us your feedback. We're not sitting here saying everything's going to be perfect. Great leaders think through as best they can all the A, B's, and C's that can happen. But creativity can really be thriving in the neutral zone if we as leaders encourage it with our team. If we stay open-minded to not just stay rigid to, hey, this is the plan A, B, and C, and say, you know what, our team has great insights, and maybe we need to pivot here, maybe we need to pivot there. So that's real important in this neutral zone to listen to your team, give feedback, and to realize that, hey, that this is common. One other thing, and when we walk through this in our transition, there's typically temporary structure. So it's hard when you're changing and you're trying to shift, like we're going from a 20-person team to a 120-person team. And so when you're doing things like that, sometimes you got to put in some temporary structures. Sometimes you're putting something in there that's not going to be there for the next 3 to 5 years, but hey, over the next 1 or 2 years, we've got to do things this way because of change and because of dynamics and all these other things. So letting your team know that, hey, there's going to be some temporary structures. Don't think that this is the way it's going to be forever. And again, communicating them, letting them understand the why. That's so important. It says, one of the Bridges insights I kind of come up with here, it says stability and transition comes from rhythm, not certainty. Again, that's why I say communication is so important, and just making sure you're keeping that pulse. Make sure you're having that rhythm where you can give feedback, you can give insight to your team, and that, I think that's real important on that. The neutral zone, it isn't a pause between meaningful moments. It's a space where meaning is rebuilt. I think it's very important for us as leaders to understand that and communicate that to our team. All right. So the new beginnings. Everybody loves the new beginnings. Well, I do, but some people don't. But the new beginning. So this is when transition really takes hold. And one of the things I love that Bridges talks about is he says, new beginnings are not announced. As leaders, we love to announce things, right? We say, hey, this is it. And we love to talk about it and say all these things. But the reality is, new beginnings are not announced, they're accepted. So until your team accepts the new beginning, until you get traction in what is really happening, all the way up the food chain, all the way down to the last person in line in your organization, that's when the new beginning really happens. And so we have to really understand, the meaning, the why, anchor into our identity, and just understand the direction. One of the things that you really have to, I said meaning is, again, as leaders, we want to always talk about the mechanics. Hey, this is how this is going to go. When we're in the middle of working out a new personal lines transformation, and we always want to look at the mechanics of it. And that's important to understand, right? But if you don't back that up with the meaning, the why we're doing this, what this means for the client, what this means for your team, what this means for the organization, and the meaning behind this new beginning, the mechanics are just going to fall on deaf ears, and it's going to be met with that resistance. They're going to go back to that neutral zone. They're going to go back to those, other choices, the responses of, redesign or trying to restore, those types of things. And so you got to always kind of revisit that and make sure you anchor these transitions with the meaning and the why, and really help people through that. Not just the mechanics. The mechanics are important, but you've got to couple that really, really strong with the meaning. And again, that goes back to, purpose. We talk about, the 6 Guidelight pathways, and y'all hear me say this. It's purpose, it's identity, it's and the inner battle, wisdom and discernment. We talk about legacy and culture, and then of course the stewardship and succession. So those pathways are real important for us to address, and I think Bridges hits on a lot of these. The second point in this new beginning is, again, identity must catch up to structure. So again, it's just helping people understand their identity in these new roles, because some people take on new roles or just new processes and things, and so they have to understand their identity in that. And again, it's not always in the structure. It really goes back to the meaning and the why, like who we are now. So lastly, I really want to kind of, in the new beginning, one of the things Bridges talks about is reinforcement turns beginnings into reality. And that's kind of where I've already said this time and time again. In these new beginnings, just because you flip the switch, just because you roll out the new mechanics, just because you roll out the new SOPs, the new KPIs, all those things, you got the mechanics down, you've got to reinforce. One of the things Bridges talks about is he says, beginnings fail not because they're wrong, but because they are under supported. That's so important as leaders. And I've talked about my team time and time again as leaders, especially when we go in transitions. I say, listen, I need, the regular leadership needs to be at about 80% of bandwidth, because when you go into transition, you're going to be doubling up and you're going to be going at about 120% of capacity. So you want to make sure your leadership teams have capacity to support the change, because it takes a lot more. So when I talk to organizations and they're not going through a transition, but their leadership is already at 110%. I'm like, hey, we got to build bandwidth. We got to build in some structure here. Because if you go through transition and you're taking people that are normally at 110%, now you take them to 150%, like that's not going to go well. It's not going to be supported really well. And we as leaders, and especially CEOs and business owners, we've got to understand when we go through that, we've got to create bandwidth within our leadership team and within our team itself to make sure people can be supported in this, because it takes a lot. Transitions, it takes a lot of work. And I think everybody knows that. It's just, again, at the top, you kind of think, well, we're going to do this, this, and this. And so it's important for us to keep that pulse with our team. But, that's really it. I mean, that's all I've kind of got for you today. I hope that it means a lot to me, because it's something I've done all my life. And when it comes to businesses and organizations, we've transitioned, well over a couple dozen companies. And so I've seen it, and it's just, no one's ever going to do it perfectly, right? No transition is perfect. But if you anchor into some of these things that Bridges talks about, you give attention to some of these things, you will be way ahead of the game. Your team will be better for it. Your clients will be better for it. Your culture will be stronger for it. And I just think it's important. So I hope you got some good value out of this. I hope it was meaningful. If you like it, give a thumbs up, hit like, share it, all that kind of stuff that we do on social media to kind of help things get out there. But I thank you. Appreciate your time with me today, and have a great one. Be blessed.